Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the JP Podcast. Today we have Dan Hagadorn. Did I say it right?
Yep, Hagadorn. Yeah.
Hagadorn, which we were talking prior to this, which means hedge of thorns.
Yeah, in Dutch. Yeah.
It's a strong last name. And he runs a company. Him and his wife run an organization called Preparing Kids for Life. Got a chance to meet you through Shane, Shane Roby, who referred you over. And he's like, you got to have Dan on the show. He is brilliant. His love for kids, his love for families, for marriages. It's just a great individual. And we had a call. And I thought you were like 25 years old because you have this young voice. You're like, George, I'm 50. And I saw
54.
54.
Yeah.
I saw some of the videos you and your wife have. And I was like, you get a feeling of, this person truly cares about what they're talking about. It's not just a business forum. It's your passion.
Yeah.
So great to have you on the podcast today. Thank you for coming.
Yeah, I'm really happy to be here and so excited to chat with you.
So tell us, how did you get into this space? How did you guys start, PK4L, Preparing Kids for Life? How did you guys start it? How did you get into it? Why did you get into it?
Well, I've always really loved teaching. And that's kind of been my gig for many years now. And as I was teaching, I started noticing that the kids coming into my class, a lot of them, I would end up getting a lot of the problem kids or whatever, which I don't really like because they're just, well, there's other reasons for that. But the bottom line is that I resonated with them, and I found out, wow, there's actually a lot more going on here behind the scenes. And if you stop to get to know them and know what's going on, wow, it's understandable why they're showing up the way they are. And it started me thinking, what if, you could go back to the parenting side of things and actually change it? Because parents are so influential in the lives of their kids. If you want to go to the problem, you go to the root. And so kind of looking at that, and then started exploring, okay, so what is the problem with parents? What are they struggling with? What are they having a hard time with? And I started speaking a lot at conferences and would have Q&A sessions with parents. And it's kind of like these two fears kept coming up over and over and over again. And it was usually some version of, I don't have what it takes to be a good parent, and I'm going to mess my kids up. They asked them in different ways. They sounded, but essentially that was the core of what, and I need to answer those questions for parents. I want parents to show up and be confident in the mom or the dad that God meant them to be, and enjoy it. Parenting should be a joy. We're raising a child. We're not fixing a problem. We're not managing a situation. We're raising a child, and it's awesome. It's a blessing. And why doesn't it feel that way for people? Why are parents so frustrated and so forth? And so then it really got into, okay, well, what's behind that? And then you kind of go into, well, actually what's behind that is parents have a hard time dealing with their stuff, because being moms and dads are like, everything is all about their kids and what can I do for my kid? And they're not really thinking about themselves. And they don't realize that actually I need to take care of myself first so that I can show up as the mom or dad that God meant me to be for my kid. And that's where it came from.
What were the main issues that you were seeing with kids in classrooms that you kind of identified that connected you to, or identified that was something in the parent or in their home?
Well, probably the best story I can give, and this happened, thank God, my first year of teaching. And there was a student in my class who was late all the time, and then when he was in and sometimes would just miss class altogether. When he was there, half the time he'd be sleeping. And to my shame, I had kind of written this kid off, like, all right, well, loser kid, whatever, and kind of just dismissed him as that. And then I had this assignment where I just was having the kids, I taught history, and I was like, okay, so in history, there's all these situations that we've studied. What do you think is the problem that we're facing today that people 20 years from now or 30 years from now are going to be reading about? Like, what's the biggest problem today? And so this kid, and I told him too, I said, I want you to be really honest. So you don't even have to put your paper on this, or your name on the paper.
Sure.
And so anyways, so he turned his paper in, and I read it. And to this day, I read it the first day of every class that I teach, because here's why. In that letter, he just was talking about how his brother and his family and his dad had gotten into alcohol and had left the family. The mom is working multiple jobs, and then when he died after he left the family, and she just sort of never really got over that. And so as a result, she started drinking. And then he's going at 2, 3 in the morning, pick his mom up from a bar. And then he's working early to kind of help support the family because his older brother had also died in an accident because he had been drinking. So he get in a car accident. I mean, it's just this horrible, rolling mess. And so here's this kid who's supporting his family at that age in high school. And so in it, he said, gosh, it makes me get emotional thinking about it. He just said, all this is going on. And he's like, so that's why I'm late to your class. And that's why I fall asleep sometimes. And I was just like, I had no idea. And from that point on, I'm like, okay, whatever I'm seeing on the surface, there is a story behind that. And I'm going to focus on what is the story behind that rather than what I'm seeing right now. And I'm going to let them know that I care about that. And, it takes a little while. Their walls are up and stuff. But if they know that you really care, they will lower those walls. And we ended up having an amazing experience. But I read that letter to my class every year because I'm like, look, guys, I don't know what's going on in your life. I don't want to pretend to. But I know that a lot of you, it's just a miracle you're even here. And so that's obviously a more dramatic story, but there's a lot of other stories like that where you just sort of see what's going on in these kids' lives and you're like, wow, that's a lot.
Staying on the kid topic real quick, as a teacher, what do you do there? Like because there may be somebody watching this that's a teacher, there may be people that, we deal with kids in the offices, things like that. We deal with a lot of people here. What do you do for somebody when that's not necessarily your profession, but they need love, they need guidance? Is it just hearing them? Is it just being present? Is it just caring?
Being present.
Just being present.
Yeah, just being present. And as simple as that sounds, we have a really hard time being present in our society. It's one of the reasons why even something like grief is so challenging. We send balloons, we send cards, all with good intentions, but it's creating this separation between just showing up at someone's door and saying, hey, I have no idea what it feels like to be in your shoes right now. I can only imagine how much pain you're in and what's going on, but I'm just here. If you want to talk, I'm here to listen. If you want to watch TV, I'll sit down with you. If you want to just have some food, I'll have some food. I'm just here with you in this. I'm in this with you. And when people feel that, then it gives them the freedom to sort of go through and start grieving and start processing and so forth. And that is enormously difficult. That's why we have such a hard time being comfortable around grieving people. And we actually subconsciously are like, hey, can you get over your grief? Because I'm really uncomfortable and I really don't want to face my own. So.
Yeah, I don't think anybody's taught on how to really help somebody go through grief.
No, we're not. This is probably its own topic, but it's interesting. I was studying this, and 2 ideas removed from children's books about 100 years ago: grief and evil. Now, the interesting thing about children's books is that if you think about it, a society distills all of its deepest, essential, most core foundational truths into what it would put in a children's book, albeit in a simplified manner.
Sure.
But it's distilling everything. This is what the next generation needs, and so forth. And so you can really see a society's values by what you see in children's books. And so as those 2 ideas got removed from them, these are big existential questions for kids to wrestle with and think about: death and evil. And it kind of gets them out of themselves. And obviously there's an age appropriateness to it, but I mean, still, it's an important thing because of the reality of it. And when that's removed, then we don't. And what's stepped up in its place is a whole bunch of myths that are unhelpful and often hurtful, like time heals all wounds.
Yeah.
Okay, is that what you're going to do the next time your car gets a flat tire? You're just going to sit on the side of the road and wait for it to reinflate? I mean, That's the same, as silly as that sounds, that's the same idea as, oh, time is just going to heal it. I mean, I've had a conversation, I remember one time talking, and this woman approached me afterwards, and she was in her 60s somewhere, and her husband had died 40 years ago. And she, like that, was just weeping.
She never dealt with it.
Because it happened yesterday. Like, if you don't process it, it is like it goes somewhere. It stacks inside of us, and it comes out somehow.
Why did they remove grief and evil from kids' books? Have you looked into why that was removed?
You know, that is a really good question, and I haven't really been able to find a satisfactory answer other than, you know, in the school system, it started to get decidedly more humanistic. And so these kinds of topics naturally bring in, you know, God and other things that are not really desired or wanted in the school system. And it became more, you know, kind of, I guess you could say, enlightenment based. And it started pulling away from its moral anchors, you know, in that way.
And so being a teacher, since you're in that world, you know, you take out Pledge of Allegiance, you take out God, you take out, you know, mom and dad, you take out these things from the family, you know, you probably see the impact with the kids that being removed.
Yeah. And that's part of what you see in the behaviors is you remove the anchors from the kids.
Yeah.
You know, because they're looking for stability. And, you know, when you don't, you know, it's funny. I asked my kids, this is like when my wife was pregnant, and and then I did this for probably 3-4 years. And I said to my students, what do you think would make a good dad? What makes a good dad? And we would spend a day, and I just fill up my board with all, and it's awesome. When they know that you're really asking a serious question, they'll give you serious answers. And
wow.
The funniest thing, you know, the number one thing that they said I needed to be a good dad?
Being present?
Well,
no.
But it was giving my kids boundaries. And they said, don't be like a Nazi about it, but boundary, like good, solid, healthy boundaries. And I'm like, that is interesting, because boundaries give them security. Boundaries actually give them, oh, I'm cared for, I'm being watched, I'm being nurtured, and my parents want to protect me.
Yeah.
And again, there's obviously a difference between healthy and unhealthy boundaries, sure. But you know, I was like, because you don't think that's going to come out of the mouth of a teenager.
No.
I was like, what?
Yeah.
But it was consistent, and it was year after year.
People want strong leadership. People want somebody to care.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so I would say that being present is part of that.
Sure.
Because it isn't just, you know, you're a dictator sitting on the side, oh, go do this. You're like, no, I want you to understand why I'm telling you this. Yeah. I want you to understand that it comes from a place of I care about you. I want the best for you. Therefore, I want to put a limit on these things. Just like we put a limit on, I want my kids to have fun and play. I don't want you doing that in the middle of a busy street, though.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep. I think that a lot of parents, though, it's like we're raised by people that are like, hey, they tell you what to do. So if you're raised that way, your parents told you what to
right.
do. You don't really communicate effectively with your children.
Right.
You just kind of tell them what to do versus really process with them.
Yeah.
So, okay, so then going back to the parents, so you saw this kid with an issue. You were present. You understood. You got to know them. They trusted you. They shared their issue with you. They felt heard. How did you transition to working with parents? Like, because that probably is somewhat of a sensitive topic of like, hey, I noticed your kid is going through this. What's
right.
going on at home? Like, is that
right.
even a boundary you can cross with school? How do you do that?
Well, you can't really do that at school, but at like the conferences that I would speak at, because we actually homeschooled our daughter. And so I would speak at a lot of homeschool conferences and working with parents. And unfortunately, you know, a lot of times parents started bringing a public school mindset into their home. So they taught their kids, they parented their kids like they were parented, like they were educated, instead of opening up to this new possibility that was in front of them. And I think that the transition was just simply saying, look, I know you want to be an awesome mom or an awesome dad for your kids. You're a parent, like that's just like in your DNA. You want that.
Sure.
So it really becomes, so what's in your way right now? And it's interesting because, you know, resistance is always provoked. So if you're getting resistance from your kid, there's a provoking that's happening. Now, obviously, you're leading and guiding and directing your kid, but you're also trying not to exasperate them either, or let them become so disheartened and discouraged that they just kind of resign themselves to whatever. So there's a balance there, but it's working with the parents and saying, hey, look, you're doing the best you can with what you know. What if you could know differently? What if you could know better? And kind of letting them marinate on that idea for a second, and then saying, what if I could show you how to process through your life so that your child has a childhood that they draw strength and encouragement and inspiration from, instead of having a childhood they have to recover from, like you did.
So these were conferences that you started doing. How did you get into that? You started seeking it out? People started seeking you out? Like something through church, then...
Yeah, a little bit of both. Some through church, some through our homeschooling community. And there's an organization called Classical Conversations, which I love. Lee Bortons was the founder of it. And I worked with her and would speak at her conferences all over the States. And so it's just sort of helping parents kind of get around this mindset, because there's a whole mindset shift that honestly has to happen in order to be able to homeschool your kids. And part of that is understanding what's going on in the system. And part of that is understanding what are the results the system is producing, and then saying, okay, how do I be intentional about doing something different? Whether that's something like homeschooling, or just because not every parent can. So maybe you have to stay in the system because of financial reasons or different things. Well, at least you can be intentional about helping, offset what's going on. If you're not aware of it, then you can't do anything to offset it. And so that was really part of the whole process of then starting to interact with parents. And then you get a lot of questions afterwards. Sure. And you start going, so there's a pattern here. And then you start thinking, wow, well, like I said, every parent wants to do the best they can. And what do they know? Well, they know how they were parented. They know how they were schooled. Beyond that, it's really hard to think of doing it any differently. It's kind of like if you were explaining wetness to a fish.
Yeah.
Where do you start? That's all they've ever known. Like that's all they know.
So how does a parent, like that part, you know what you know what you don't know, but you don't know what you don't know.
Yeah.
So how does somebody that wants to be a good parent figure out, hey, what mistakes am I making? Where would they start? Is it a book? Is it the conference? Is it you? Is it...
Yeah, well, we started working with parents one-on-one through a process of grief recovery. And grief recovery is really about navigating transitions. We all deal with transitions in life. That's a fact of life. It's a reality of life. Death and divorce are probably the most dramatic and intense of these transitions, but we all face them. Moving is a transition. Losing your innocence is a transition. There's all kinds of transitions that happen all the time. And so as a parent, if you can learn how to help your kid navigate those in a healthy way, then you're really setting themselves up to be a resilient, self-motivating child that's going to go and be able to really step into what God has for their lives and live out the story, But without that, it's very limiting, and it kind of restricts. And so that's really how parents would start, is they start with themselves. And we have, that, and we also created a program called self-parenting, just because, we're like, we want to go back to those places where people were misparented, where mom or dad didn't show up in the way they needed to, and helping them kind of work through that. One of the things that's interesting is, I've noticed this with a lot of dads, is that we have a country full of unfinished men. And what I mean by that is our dads, we have two things we need from our dads. We need to know that we are enough, and then we have what it takes. And there's 1,000,001 ways that that's communicated to us or not communicated to us from our dads through all the different stages of our development as men. And if we don't get that question answered by our dad, then we will sadly take that question elsewhere. And usually that question goes to the woman. And so when that question is given to the woman, subconsciously, it's actually kind of repellent to her, because she's like, I want you to come and join your strength in a complementary way with me. I want to partner. I don't want to have to validate everything that you are and, as a man and so forth. And so this leads to, usually you've got the guy who just, notches up on his bedpost, whatever girl he gets, or is kind of like this simpering, kind of needy, I need you to validate me kind of a thing. And, we get sophisticated about that, but it's still the same inner need. And so it's really kind of going back into something like that, like I call it a father wound, where you are reparenting that, where you're self-parenting. You're giving yourself what your dad didn't or couldn't. Wow. And, you realize, hey, dads do the best they can with what they know. That's all they can really work off of. And so you have grace for your dad, but also you realize, but there was some needs that were legitimate that weren't met, and they need to be, so that we can show up, as husbands, as fathers, fully men. Not perfect men, no one ever perfect, but not unfinished.
Sure. So you deal with men and women going back and identifying certain maybe traumas that they just haven't dealt with.
Yeah.
And I know you talked about, there's different transitions in life. And so 2-part question, we can come back to the kid part. Like when you're working with children, do you have a list of these transitions that children make and how to parent them through that kind of that transition? Like, hey, they want to be independent. How do you, so do you have that? And, but to the mom and dad, to stay on that topic first, is what are the most common, I know you said a couple, but what are the most common things you see with parents that they haven't finished doing that work on, or they're not aware of it, or they don't know how to do it? What are those?
Well, I think it's when you experience these transitions in life.
Okay.
And then when you don't know how to navigate them, then typically all that happens is they stack. So they're stacking up. It's kind of like if you think about a tea kettle, and you turn the heat on, and eventually there's enough pressure that builds up, and it's blowing, and that pressure has to go somewhere. Now imagine putting a cork in that. It ends up exploding somewhere down the line, or what you end up doing is you sort of medicate yourself so that you can ignore the explosion. And neither one of those is healthy. But then that leads to its whole other set of consequences. So, for example, you grow up and you grow up in an abusive environment, and now you've moved on and you become a husband. And what are you going to do with all of that trauma from your past that now oftentimes is triggered? Like your wife will say something and it immediately triggers, like when your dad would say da 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 da. And like, for example, in my own life, so I noticed that, like, my wife would ask me to do something, not even like a big deal, like take out the trash, or could you mow the lawn or whatever, no big deal request. And I would feel this thing come up in me. I was like, what is that all about? Because my dad would give me, my summers were all yard work. I worked all summer long. My friends are going doing fun stuff. I'm at home doing yard work until into the afternoon or sometimes in the evening. Because my dad had a list of stuff for me to do tacked to my mirror every morning. And I'm like, wow. So I realized, I kind of got to, that's what I mean about there are these things that don't necessarily you make a connection to, but produce I had a lot of resentment built around that because that happened over a long period of time. And then instead of just being able to look at this independent thing, like my sweet wife is just asking me, to kind of help out around the house, it becomes this thing that's attached to my dad. It might as well be a list of stuff to do that's tacked to the mirror, instead of my wife just sweetly asking, hey, can I do that? So that's an example. Now, so then I react to my wife, and now there's a conflict over this. And now my wife is feeling like, well, gosh, we're partners, aren't we? This is your house too. Kind of a thing. And then there's this whole dynamic that gets built into that. And so if you haven't dealt with or process through that, you can kind of just see, and that's just one tiny example of multiple interactions that we have with our spouse. You're just building on these frustrations and so forth. And so then, then there's like this whole passive aggressive thing that sometimes emerges, and then you're like sniping back at each other, or maybe you just can't handle it at all and you're off to the bar or doing whatever, just to kind of medicate and not have to feel this pressure or this dynamic. And at the end of the day, nobody's dealing with the giant elephant in the room, which is all this stuff that hasn't been processed.
So how do you even know what that is? Is there like an assessment thing? Like, how do you respond to that? 'Cause I'm like, yeah, there's probably some stuff I got to work on right now. Like, how do people know what they need to work on? Is it, hey, when are you triggered? Or, hey, like, because I'm sure there's a ton of different scenarios.
There are. And I think that the main thing is when you find yourself responding in a way that is way beyond what the situation is. Like if you're in the bathroom and the toothpaste cap is left off, does no one do anything right now? Oh, you do like, whoa, dude, it's a toothpaste tube that doesn't have cap on. I mean, like, you know what I mean? Like, I'm kind of being silly, but that's when you start seeing these outsized reactions or responses. It's a great window. That's the other thing. People see these negative things as they usually go shame-based or guilt-based. Like, what if you saw it as, oh, that's a window that God's opening for me to see something that he wants me to work on. Like, there's either a window into healing or a window into something that needs to change. And what if we could see it that way instead of going, oh, I suck. I'm a horrible husband. I'm a horrible dad. What if we saw it as, oh, that's a window into something, and then be willing courageously to go into that and see where it leads.
Got it. So you kind of teach people to be more aware of where they're being triggered.
Yeah.
Okay. And then from there, you process that trigger with them.
Yeah.
Like, why do you think it's that way? I don't know. Well, then you do that part.
Yeah, and then you're kind of thinking about, well, when's the last time you felt that, or when is the first time somebody told you that, or where did you get that from, or who said that to you? Where did you learn that?
Got it. And
kind of going back into that, and then you're working around that space so that you can go, okay, well, what is true, really? Because we all have our version of events that are colored by multiple things, triggers, past trauma, etc. So it's really, I think that's where you partner with God to go, okay, well, let's go into the truth and let's explore that. And then there's a way to process that. I look at, honestly, unapologetically, there's a lot of tools that some of which we've adopted, some of which we've created, but they're pathfinders. I believe God is the path. And these are just places to help you get to the path, which is ultimately God. And that's just been my lived experience. It's not I'm on a stage here preaching. That's been my lived experience. The healing I have found and experience has ultimately been found in God. And these were tools just led me there.
Got it. Yeah, we had the last couple of weeks. So, and Shane knows this. Last year I said I want to read the Bible because I go to this church and the pastor says, how can you lead your family if you don't know God's word? What are you leading them on? And so I'm like, and he says, I'm a big believer that as a husband, as a father, you should be the leader of the house. You should lead your family based on a relationship with God and God's word, and you should know God's word. Right. And so I'm like, man, I don't, I say I'm Christian, but I've never read the book. Up until this point, I would open a Bible and I'd be like, what's God want to tell me today? He's really going to speak to me through this, my accidental, what page I fall on. So I'm like, I'm going to read the Bible. So I started doing the Bible app, and it's like the audio version every day.
That's awesome.
And so we should be wrapping up in like the next 20 days or so. So I'm fired up, and I could never see myself even being the person that's fired up to finish the Bible. So it's just amazing, the transformation. Like,
that's cool.
When you go seek God, like how your heart converts. But a couple weeks ago, we dealt with all these situations in the office, tough. And I was sharing with Shane that the old me would have been overwhelmed or anxious or worried or frustrated or angry, and it was just completely different. And it wasn't like, I know when I can will something, and I know when it's mental and how I can change the meaning of it mentally, but like when you have real grace with something, you're like, wow, I feel a lot of peace there. That's uncommon and unnatural,
Yeah.
then for me, it's like, wow, this is the spiritual part of it. So under having that connection with God and having that grace, I could see how a lot of these issues end up just leading more towards what's your relationship with God and what's really inside of you, and have you done that healing,
Yeah.
So you help the parents deal with their issues so that they can be better parents.
Yeah. Basically, I mean, in a nutshell, it's like, look, whatever you don't deal with, your kids will. And that usually kind of helps parents, because at the end of the day, like I said, parents will do anything for their kids. They will walk in front of a speeding bus for their kids.
Sure.
They don't care.
Yeah.
Like, you're my kid. I will do anything for you. And so then I always say, okay, I know you'll do anything for your kid. Will you do this? Will you deal with your stuff? Because that's the best thing you can do for your kid. That's how you show up as the mom or dad that your kid deserves and that God wants you to be, made you to be. That's the other thing parents miss. God has almost 8 billion people on planet Earth to choose from. He gave your kids to you.
Wow.
He trusts you with your kids. There's something special you have to give your kids that nobody else could, and if they could, he would have given it to them. And parents, there's a lot of reasons why parents feel insecure about parenting. I mean, a lot of that has to do with culture and so forth. The school system, objectively, I mean, I'll document that in my book. They literally think parents are the problem and need to be removed.
The school system thinks that.
The school system thinks that, and they say that with their own mouths. This goes back to the founders like Cubberley and G. Stanley Hall and Thorndike and Dewey and all of the, quote, founding fathers of our modern public school system. And this goes into even, what was her, Melissa Perry. She was on MSNBC, I think, back in 2008. And she was talking about how parents have this misguided notion that kids belong to them. And you're like, I mean, they say it. It isn't like reading between the lines. They say it openly. The National Education Association, other things, that parents are the problem. And it needs to be left to these experts. And of course, we're trained to just rely on experts rather than rely on, no, I have my authority from God, and I can be confident in that. And it doesn't mean I'm a perfect parent, but it does mean I am the parent that God meant me to be for this kid.
So then for us, we plan on homeschooling our kid, until the certain age where we can already establish certain values, and because we don't want somebody else teaching them how to analyze or look at that situation. We want them to have a lens of God. We want to have a lens of, family. How do parents today, right? Because they're working, two parents working, then they're getting home and it's like homework, chores, this, that, like functional, real, like applicable advice. What can a parent do if they can't homeschool their kid? And then we'll go to homeschool.
Yeah, and I think that's a great question, and I think it's important to realize that homeschooling is not an option for everybody because of life situations. I think it's really more about intentionality. So there are things, and there's ideas about, like, for example, if I was a parent and my kid couldn't get out of it, I would say, look, treat your classes like you would treat a day job. This is not your career. This doesn't define you, but you're better off just sort of getting through this so that you can then pursue the things that you do want to do. What does interest you? And then you just start being intentional about guiding them, because parents and their engagement is the number one influence. I have found this, I've taught more than 20 years, and I've taught at poor schools, inner city schools, private schools. I've taught the gamut. And the number one factor, I don't care if you're a single mom working 2 jobs or if you're a wealthy family, living on high on the hog, it doesn't matter. The number one predictor of how well that student is doing is the level of engagement of the parent. Socioeconomic factors, nothing. Ethnicity, nothing. Nothing matters like engagement with your kid. And I've saw that for more than 20 years. In school. So that was what I say. I think it's really about having an intentionality with things. And that is a huge tool in your favor. So then you can start counteracting some of the things that are going on in the schools.
So having more time with them, having more conversations with them, being more involved in the process, processing those things outside of school, giving them a different perspective where, hey, just because somebody says something, it doesn't mean it's a fact.
Right.
You're not going to, that's their belief, etc. What about for parents that are homeschooling? like you guys homeschooled you said your daughter, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Why did you decide to homeschool?
Well, interestingly, I becoming a teacher, and then I read a book by John Taylor Gatto called The Underground History of Education. And
Underground History of Education.
yeah, let's see. Actually, no, let's see. The Underground History. I sort of referred it to shorthand for so long now. I'm trying to think of the entire title.
Okay.
but yeah, The Underground History. And he was a former teacher, taught for 30 years, highly decorated teacher, won New York State Teacher of the Year a couple times, won, Teacher of the Year. I mean, this guy was a decorated teacher, and he basically said, look, I've looked at this system, researched it, and what it's designed to do, it's designed to essentially standardize kids into a predictable mediocrity. And it's a larger topic, but basically he's saying, he found that there's two things. Our industrialists were the largest contributors to education up until 1915. So like the Carnegies, the Rockefellers, all these people, they were the ones dumping the most money into our public school system. And they learned very early on that there's two things, is that bored people make the best consumers. So boredom had to be trained. Not boredom where you're bored and then you have to come up with your own ideas, which actually leads to creativity. Boredom can be actually good. I'm talking about being trained to endure boredom, because now you're being fitted for a factory. Now it's a cubicle, but back then it was a factory. And the second thing is that childish people are the easiest consumers to manipulate.
You said what was the second part?
Childish people.
Childish
So
people.
childishness has to be extended as far and as long as possible. So, now if you think about it, and this shocks my students, like 120 years ago, your average 14-year-old was like a David Farragut who, in the War of 1812, takes a captured British frigate and brings it, off the coast of Brazil to America. He wasn't getting a special gig on Oprah or Ellen that's just what 14-year-olds were doing back then. Most of them, your average 14, 120 years ago, was apprenticed to his dad's business, was apprenticed to somebody else's business, or was starting his own business, and a small fraction went off to college. But that's what your average 14-year-old was doing. I've given my students a test that just at the turn of the century back in 1890, that in Salina, Kansas, this is what you had to pass to get out of 8th grade. My AP kids, there's 47 questions on it. My AP kids, supposedly the cream of the crop, best score I ever got in all the years I gave it to them was 4 out of 47 on this test.
Wow.
And that's what used to be required to get out of 8th grade.
So why have we dumbed down the education system so much?
Well, okay, so it goes back to the idea of consumers.
At one point, that was being taught at home, or that was being taught in
Well,
school
you
back then?
you would basically have a one-room schoolhouse kind of thing, which is a whole other. There's a genius in that, but parents would train their kids on basic reading and writing, arithmetic. It's an interesting process whereby we've made that much more complicated than it needs to be, so people have jobs.
Say that again.
We've made processes that are actually quite simple and straightforward to learn more complicated so that people can be employed, like teachers. And so we don't need specialists. We just need to teach it properly. I'll give you an example. So mathematics, most students hate math. I mean, if you just talk to your average kid, like, oh,
yeah, sure,
they hate it. The reason they hate it is because of the way that it's taught.
For sure.
It's an inch deep, mile wide. If you taught addition and let them have I don't care. We don't care if it takes a week, a month, or a year, addition. And when you master that, we'll move on to the next, and then the next. And then math is sequential. So if you have them master this step, then they're prepared to be successful at mastering the next, and so forth and so forth and so on. And if you just focus on mastery versus, well, we've got to cover chapter 4 by next week, then it's a whole different ballgame for kids. And so what ends up happening is it's a very simple way of testing whether or not you've learned. If you can teach it in simple terms to somebody else, you've learned it. If you can't do that, we're just measuring degrees of familiarity.
Got it.
And so if we're really interested in learning, then we teach our students until they've achieved mastery and can actually teach it to somebody else, and then we're ready to move on.
But you don't have that. You're not able to do that in the school system.
No, because we got to move on. Well, there's a chapter, and we have this curriculum it has to cover, and we have these standards that are mandated by the state, and we have to meet them, and there's all this stuff. And again, it's a way of training people to think. If you think about it, who's successful? The students that are most successful are the ones who are best at regurgitating information that a teacher or textbook said is true.
Sure.
And they get rewarded with good grades, and those good grades give them a good GPA, and that good GPA gets them into a good college, and a good college supposedly gives them the great house with the picket fence, 2.4 kids, and a dog. And that's what's sold. So the people that started our system realized back in the day that kids drive purchases. So that's where we go back to the bored consumers and the childish consumers. And so childishness has to be extended. Now we have like grown men in their mom's basement, and they're like 42 years old playing Call of Duty. Now, I'm not against video games. I'm just saying, like, if you're a 42-year-old man, have a bigger ambition than working at Starbucks and playing video games.
Sure.
Like, step into who you could be. I'm not saying that to be down on them. I'm saying, like, look, there's a whole lot you're leaving on the table.
For sure. That
you could be taking and enjoying and just living an amazing life that you're kind of resigned for whatever reason.
So going back to bored people, and so, hey, let's create a system to where we bore them over time so they stop thinking, stop analyzing,
I'll give you an
questioning.
Example. So bells are like Pavlov's dogs. Bells interrupt learning. It would be like we're in the middle of this great conversation. Oh, there's the bell. Got to go. So what is communicated? What is communicated is that discussion which we were having, which was so wonderful, means nothing because we can interrupt it with a bell. And so if that's the case, then don't really pay too much attention to what's going on because it doesn't really matter anyway because the bell is going to kick it. Instead of, okay, well, let's spend a good amount of time on something and actually have a real deep conversation about it and explore things with it. Can't do that. We've got this timed bell system that goes.
Because you got to follow the curriculum.
You got to follow the curriculum. And so the curriculum assumes that everybody learns the same thing, the same way, at the same pace, at the same speed, at the same time. Nothing works that way.
Correct.
There's nothing in life that works that way. The other thing that's weird is like age, the age segregation, of schools. It's you're in your class and so forth. But in real world, you interact with everybody of every different age.
Sure. So what's the solution then?
Well, the solution, I mean, the real solution, honestly, is torch the public school system. It's beyond repair.
Okay.
And the reason I say that is because literally the people that created it for a very different reason than the reason that most parents think.
And the reason they created it was to bore people and keep them childish, to make them good employees.
So they don't think.
Good consumers.
Right. They don't think. Okay, think about it this way. If you are a company that sells widgets, do you want a consumer that goes, well, can I afford that item? Is this item actually really of the quality that they say it is? Have other items been, tested of similar nature? Is there something that's cheaper and better? Or do you want to go, oh, it's shiny, I'm going to buy it now? I mean, we have people that camp out at the Apple store days in advance of some new thing. That's how well trained Pavlov's dogs are, right? It's the consumerism. It's so just, wow, really? Like, your life is just going to change. And they've been trained to think, oh, it's shiny, it's bored. So then
the education system, you're saying, drives consumerism.
Yes. Yeah, it drives it because it removes people's ability to think properly, to critically think. Another example, you're a politician. Do you want your constituency to say, well, how do you vote on issues that matter to me? What is your voting record on that? Who's giving you money? What organizations approve or disapprove of the way that you have handled your political career? How much money are you getting from these special interest groups? Or do you want to, I saw a YouTube video, that guy was really cool, man, I'm going to vote for him. Who do you want as a constituent if you're a politician?
Sure, followers.
You want everything, you want the dumbed down version of all of that because they're much more easily to manipulate.
Mm.
And so ultimately, it's just like the market. Markets love predictability. So do businesses. They want standardized, predictable consumers. That's their optimum market. And that's exactly the assembly line that the public school system produces.
So the solution, if you don't have the school system the way it is, if you're rewriting education, rewriting how it would work, what does that look like?
Well, I think if you did have a school system, I think the one-room schoolhouse, which I alluded to earlier, was a really interesting way. So you have obviously younger kids with older kids, which is, again, more realistic. But also, one of the things is that if you're older and you've already learned something and you're teaching somebody to somebody who's younger, that's just reinforcing your learning. And when something's being reinforced, it allows you to start thinking of something in a different way. It's like when you have knowledge that's completely locked in, now you've opened up another door to creativity because you don't have to hold this in place. This is there. Now I'm free. I'm expanded to think about more stuff and more stuff. And, in that situation, it's more about learning, and it's not driven by curriculums. It's not driven by, we have to get to chapter 10 by next Friday. It's driven by students. And so Ken Robinson talked about this a lot. He's some great TED Talks. But learning has to be personalized, not standardized. And so obviously, I feel like the best way to do that would be homeschooling, but there are also a lot of wonderful, sort of alternatives. Like we were in a co-op, so we homeschooled our daughter, and then one day a week she was with other homeschooling families, and they had kind of a more generalized lesson. It was just sort of summing up, okay, so now tell us back what you've learned this past week. And they had an opportunity to do that and sort of demonstrate that. And then that gave us an indication on, this needs to be shored up, or this is going really well. And so that's what would dictate how you direct their education, is on the basis of how are they doing. Some things they picked up faster than others. Great. So we don't have to. So in other words, given the school example, if you're going to chapter 10 by Friday, what if the student has already got it down Monday? Now they're bored, and you're wasting their time for 4 days until the next day. And then even when you do get to Friday, there's a whole bunch of other students that still aren't really grasping it yet. So now they're moving forward into a situation where they're even more confused. And nobody likes feeling confused.
So going back to that one room schoolhouse, if somebody's older, somebody's younger, the older person needs to learn something different. The younger person needs to learn something different. How do you're wasting this older person's time from teaching them what their next is. So how does that work?
Well, because you're also teaching them new things. So it's just that I was saying, I don't mean, when I said teach, I didn't mean that would be their dedicated responsibility. I just meant that you're in this kind of ecosystem where, the process of helping teach something is how you learn something, right? And so you're kind of helping them learn it and reinforce it. Because they have a natural environment in which, they'll be, just like you think about in class, you ask your buddy, hey, how do you do for number 4? I don't get that at all, right? So that kind of situation. I didn't mean that they would be the teacher. So then you'd have the teacher that is helping them direct their lessons and is asking questions, and you can kind of work with different groups of kids because, some kids can be working on other things. And when you're in an environment where the motivation is learning, kids actually love learning. They don't really like being taught. And when I say taught, I mean the worksheets and the busy work that, and students are smart. They get it. I would pull my students all the time on this, and they would say, my seniors, they'd say, look, Mr. Hagadorn, maybe 20% of what we do in class actually has some meaning or value. The 80% is a waste of our time. And I think COVID pretty well documented that, because parents started waking up to the fact, wow, that's a lot of time that gets wasted in my kid's class. That's what they talk about in there. That's what they cover in there. This is what they're doing. And you start to see, wow, there's a lot of, and again, there are great teachers out there. I know several. They're wonderful, but they're also bad teachers. There's teachers that they have tenure and they phone it in. And there's those teachers too. So, in in an environment like that, you're just sort of all, it's kind of an ecosystem. And I'm just saying that as an alternative to say public school, but that's if you didn't want to homeschool your kids.
With the pace that kids are learning at today, do you see that still taking till they're 18 years old for them to get that education that they need?
Well, I think that, that's interesting. So we have more access to information than at any time in all of recorded human history. I mean, scholars of yesteryear would be gobsmacked by our access. But are we using it? I mean, how many people have read the classics? How many people really are intellectually challenging themselves? And how many people are just looking at, what is Juan Soto's batting average, in 2023? I mean, so there's information where, but it's not just access to information. It's what you do with that information. We have the equivalent of college degrees that are online. And I'm not even talking about going to an online college. I just mean the amount of information that's out there. There's the equivalency of a college degree on any number of subjects. Are we making use of that? Or do we watch YouTube videos on the kid that, can fart the alphabet? I mean, it's just, that's the kind of thing. It's what are we actually consuming, and what is that actually, and is that meaningful? And so I think one of the things that happens is that we start to, our minds actually start to petrify a little bit, and we get, and also we can control so much of what we expose ourselves to. We can bubbleize our worlds. And so I never, ever, ever have to see anything that makes me a little uncomfortable or that disagrees with anything that I believe. I never, ever, because I can just screen it, I can filter it, I can block it, I can just create my own little inoculated bubble. And that is, I don't believe, a very good thing. I believe it's in interacting with, truth and seeing where different people are coming from and being able to have a conversation. Of course, we can't really have civil conversation anymore. That's another topic. But, but ideally, that's what a school would be, is it's a school of, look, ask questions, not so that you get an answer and move on, but ask questions so that you can ask better questions. And keep learning and keep it. Love of learning and the ability to learn how to learn are really the two things that high school kids need the most, and they don't get.
Yeah, that's
so
powerful.
All of this learning it has to be quantified, because again, you're right. Tons of information is out there, but what are they learning?
I don't remember 80% of what I learned in high school.
I don't either.
I don't remember it. I felt like it was a waste. I'm like, how am I going to use this? To some degree, like we were working on the house the other day, and we have a deck in the back, and at the bottom we had to put a new baseboard, and so we were trying to determine what is the angle that we need to cut these two pieces to meet. I'm like, damn it! I wish I would have paid in geometry. I wish, I'm like, that's where that would have been so freaking helpful. But the way that it was taught, it was like, here's so much freaking information. I'm like, dude, I was lost, 15 minutes ago. So now I'm just like turning off, and I'm in this class, and I'm like, how do I cheat to pass this test? Like, how do I pass this test? That's all I got to do is pass this test and get out of this class. I don't feel like it's, and I don't feel like it's taught in a way where it's like, here's how you use this information. Here's how it's going to be applicable to you in life. Yeah. And I guess that's because there's so much that needs to be covered to get a person out to get the next.
Right.
So I don't see that changing though with high schools. Like, I don't see the school system reformatting. I see it more like on, hey, you know what? I am going to homeschool, or it just makes sense for me to, like, I want to find my kids' passions, and then I want to double down, triple down, quadruple down on those.
Right.
Like, what are you passionate about? So why am I going to teach you all this advanced math or make you go through this math if that's, you don't necessarily have a passion on it? You're not going to use it. So what do you do there? You can't stop that in a school system, from being taught. So unless you homeschool.
Well, I think what it is like I said, it's about the mindset, right? So one of the mindsets is grades. So what we teach let's say you have to be in the system. What do we teach our kids about grade? Look, I don't care what the grade is. I care what you've learned.
Got it.
My best student I've ever had in my entire life, his name is Linas Sapikas. He was from Lithuania. I mean, he was born here, but he had And he would go back every summer. And my best student by far, he got a C+ in my class. Because it was just, we had to go, it was APUS, and there's all that you're basically preparing for the test. That's what you do all year long. Because if you don't, and your kids don't do well, then you get fired. So, but we would have he was reading Ayn Rand's Atlas Shrugged for fun, and we're having conversations about it. We're talking about the nuances of War and Peace and the Russian writer's mastery of misery. And, that's what we're having dialogues after. I'm like, but the school system, oh, he got a C+, so he's really not one of your better students. He's my best student by far. I mean, I had another student, Nick Hubert, who was similar to that, and we would have similar conversations. He also got a C. Like my two best students ever in life, C's.
But you said something that's powerful. So for a parent, them being aware of this is what's happening in school, I feel like they're so busy. Like, I got to pay the bills. I got to work this job. I got to do this. I got to get my kids. They got to get straight A's. If I don't get good, I'm a bad parent. So,
right.
So the parent changing the perspective of this grade is not as important as the school is necessarily making it if this kid's not really learning what they need to learn next.
Right.
Yeah. That's I think that's good for parents, because that's good for me. I didn't go to college. I didn't have a passion for it. My dad necessarily didn't push me towards it. He's like, you need to go make a lot of money, be free, and live a life that you want to live, and go be happy. So there wasn't an expectation of you have to go to school. You have to get this degree. From a lot of immigrants, right? My dad's Cuban, mom's Puerto Rican, but a lot of immigrants are like, hey, you have to go get this degree because you have to get a good job, because that's,
right.
When they come here, that's what's taught. That's guarantees a good job.
And it doesn't.
Yeah. My mentor changed my life. 1.8 GPA, dropout, $500 million net worth, business owner, CEO, leader.
And he is a serious intellectual. Like, that's a guy that really grapples with big ideas. And in a much more profound way than people that have a bunch of PhDs and degrees after their name and little plaques on the wall. And I mean, I love Thomas Sowell. He said one time, some ideas are so stupid that only an academic can conceive of them. It's like, and at the end of the day, it's just, and now again, I think that there is a place for degrees, for sure. And there's some jobs that need them, but so many of my students would ask me, or they would tell me, I'm going to go to college, I'm going to get a business degree. I'm like, okay, 2 questions to ask your professor. First question, how big is your stack? Because if you're not a million liquid, you can have nothing to teach me I can't Google. Secondly, how many successful businesses have you run, and how many fails do you have? Because if you don't have at least some fails in there, then you haven't really learned enough, and then you can teach me success too. So if you don't have that, then what are you going to teach me that I can't Google?
Sure.
And I'm going to pay you how much for something I can Google? Now, if they answered yes to both of those questions, then it's worth, sitting down and finding out what they have to say and learning from them.
Yeah, but the challenge there too is that person that has that capability probably wouldn't be teaching a class necessarily.
Well, there you go.
Yeah.
There you go. And there's the conundrum, right?
Yeah.
And so it's just funny because
not because it's beneath them. It's just they're busier. Right. They're being productive. They're chasing. They're building. They're doing other things. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, at the end of the day, it's really that. I mean, if you have a love of learning and the ability to learn how to learn, there's nothing that's going to be beyond your grasp.
Do you see that the school system to some degree is also like a child care system, where it's like, hey, I got to go work. I got to work my job, and I need time to get to work. And
yeah.
So you have to be here.
They encourage the drop-off system, and they encourage a drop-off mentality. Like, parents, drop it off. We're the experts. We'll take it from here, mom and dad. That's the underlying attitude of the school system. Oh, and not only will we take it from here, we're going to do it better than you would. So just let the experts have it. And it's staggering. I've seen televised school board meetings where there's actually teachers and administrators there saying exactly that during COVID and the aftermath of, like, we're the experts. And so they're trained in the school system to look at think about this. You have an expert that validates everything you do. I'm going to use air quotes on expert because we overuse that term. But so these experts validate everything down to your last GPA point, right? And really what you want to do is you want to train a student get to the point where they know the difference between good work and needs work.
Good work and needs work.
Right. And when you reach the point where you're
needs
at
work,
that,
like I have to do this, or what do you mean?
No, needs work like, okay, this is not good quality yet. This needs something else.
Oh, okay,
this needs more effort, time, energy, something like, but it's not the finished product or the finished product. And you need to be able to do that without needing some sort of outside validation or whatever. You know, I've like one of the things, like I've written several books. Before it's published, I know it's good work. If it's not, I'm still editing. You know, and so students need to grow up having that same thing. They know the difference between this is good work and this needs some work. And when they have that and they have the ability, I mean, the ability to learn how to learn basically empowers them to say, okay, whatever new change comes along, I know how to take information, I know how to process it, absorb it, analyze it, and then apply it.
Yep.
And when you can do that with information,
even if you don't know the situation, you're no longer insecure or intimidated by it because you have a system or a process that you know you could.
Yeah. And the love of learning is what, oh, cool. You see a problem as, oh, I haven't figured this out yet. And if you're trained in where, the other thing that bugs me is like we train kids all the time, like, oh, Timmy, you're so smart. Instead of, wow, Timmy, I really love how you figured out how to do that puzzle. What am I praising? I'm praising a result or I'm praising a process.
Yeah.
Whatever you praise, you get more of. So if you start praising the process, pretty soon students start to value excellence and diligence and effort. And that's what they value, which, by the way, will produce amazing results.
Correct.
But it's a system. Now, if you start praising, you know, the other side, and it's just the reward, they will lie, cheat, and steal and find whatever shortcut they can to get the reward.
Yeah, I sure did.
Because that's the objective.
Yeah.
So really, it's interesting. You know, cheating in schools, for example, indicates that schools value grades more than students value learning.
Yeah.
Bottom line.
You just said if I fail these kids, I get fired.
Right.
So the teacher's more like, I got to make sure a certain number of my kids pass.
Right.
Otherwise, I lose my job.
Right.
Yeah. So you're reinforcing, you're recognizing the grades that the teachers are also giving to their kids. So they're more concerned with the grade than they are with teaching. It was this, and that what you said took me back to this story where they asked these children. They said, "Hey, you scored this on a test. Do you want to talk to people that you scored better than, or people that scored better than you?" And they did this study on these kids, and at the end, looking back on it, the people that wanted to talk to people that did better than them were more successful. And the people that wanted to talk to the people that they scored higher than to be validated were less successful. So it's to the same point of, do you value learning or do you value just a grade?
Yeah.
Yeah. And when you're as a kid, you're also you know that your parents value grades, your teacher value grades. So at the end of the day, you're like, dude, let me value what other people value, because then if I get straight A's, I get some money, or I get straight A's, I get to go out, or I get straight,
Yep.
Yeah.
And I think I remember somebody telling me a long time ago, I was like, I always try to be the dumbest person in the room.
Yeah, my dad told me that.
Yeah. And like, no, that's so true, because you learn so much from people. And and the thing is that when you're in there and you love learning, then you love doing that. It's not an ego thing anymore. You're like, I just love learning. If you got something that I can learn from, great, let's have a conversation. There's no ego. There's no, it's just because you love the learning. And that's why the love of learning and learning how to learn are so essential to everything. They're the keys to everything.
The love of learning and learning how to learn.
Yeah.
And I don't know if this is the case in other countries. I read somewhere that at one point it was that once they identify what you want to do professionally, that your main classes in school are all around that profession starting high school.
Yeah.
Is that accurate or no in other countries?
Yeah, no, there are a lot of countries that do that. And
What's your take on it?
I think that I understand, and I think there's a good intention, but I also think, when I was 4, I wanted to be a fire truck. Not a fireman, a fire truck. Not a realistic thing. And what if that were treated? And then you get older, and then you have other things. And I just think about, when I was 18, what I thought about professions and jobs, and then what I thought about when I was 28. And I think that that's a really difficult lock. I would much rather have the questions asked, what are my options? What are my options? And then go pursue that. And then you go, and if you find an option that doesn't work, that's just as good as finding the one that does. Because now it's, let's say you go in and you're like thinking, I want to do publicity. And you go and you intern at some place that does that, and you're like, oh my gosh, this is nothing what I thought it was. This is horrible. This is awful. This is soul sucking. And then actually that's really good, because now that's one option you can take off your plate, and now you're free to consider all your other options. And it's a process. I think that's the problem that I see with those systems, is that by starting it so early, and what do you do about a late bloomer? I mean, look at Einstein. He didn't start blooming until much later. And so I worry that, although there's a certain sensibility to it, I worry that you're eliminating some of the potential that kids might be able to explore. And maybe, by the time they're 18, they're graduating with, this is the body of options that I want to pursue, as opposed to, this is what I want to do the rest of my life. Which is kind of what we're forcing them to do when they're age 18. Because now they have to choose a major, and now they have to, instead of, what are my, and again, if the approach to education were, what are my interests, then you would have that built around. I think there's a certain value to having a base knowledge, right? And then start pursuing what you're interested in. Because I think the cool thing about subjects when they're taught well, one, they kind of reveal God's nature in them, like math, right? Reveals God's order. Literature reveals God's beauty. I mean, there's a lot of different angles to it. But the cool thing about it is when they're all working together, they're actually all connected with one another. And they all work different intellectual muscles. Like math works a different intellectual muscle than reading literature or studying history does. And so when that's all working together, there's a certain synergy there that I think really benefits the student. And then after they've got a base level of that, then you can start, well, what is my passion? What am I interested in? What was my purpose that I was given? Then start really exploring that. And you do so from, having that baseline.
And you chose teaching because it was your passion. You had a different career before teaching. I think we talked about it.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting. So in 11th grade, I had a teacher. He taught AP US history. His name was Mr. Cobry. And it was his last year in teaching. He'd been a teacher for 35 years, and you never know it. This guy was so enthusiastic, he loved teaching. He loved his kids. He just loved it. I'm like, man, if I had a job where I'm like that after 35 years of doing it, where can I sign up, And
it's powerful.
So, yeah, and that really. So from 11th grade, I really knew that I wanted to be a teacher, but when I got out,
you wanted to be a teacher because you saw his passion for teaching, or you identified the fact that you loved to teach people?
Both. I mean, I always loved speaking, and I always loved teaching, and writing, and so that just seemed like the perfect culmination of that. So it was, Ken Robinson talks about this like in The Element. He's like, when your skill set merges with your passion, that's your sweet spot, or you're in your element, as it were. And so I felt like that was my element. And then unfortunately, after school, I went down a dark road in life for about 5 years. Just did not go well after my mom's death. And then after that, I kind of got back in and started working, and then I just kind of went into entertainment publicity because it was good money. And after a while, you realize, you know what? Good money doesn't cut it. It just doesn't matter how much I'm getting paid. What matters is that I'm actually enjoying my life, And it's funny, I remember after I made that switch, which was a big switch financially too for us, my wife said after about a month in, she's like, "You're a different person." And I had no idea how much just weight that was doing a job that you hate.
That's powerful.
Yeah. And so I was like, okay. And that's kind of where it kicked off and went from there.
So teaching the kids led you to saying, man, there's a lot of work that parents need.
Yeah.
So you started, what was the first organization you started? Or like the first step?
Yeah, Preparing Kids for Life was sort of this organization that we started. And then as we did that, we started to evolve because we realized, okay, so yes, parents need help with a kind of a mindset change. You know, we wanted to enlighten them. Look, you know, whether you stay in public school or not, we're not here to, you know, soapbox on that, but do so with your eyes open.
Sure.
And that was like kind of what my first book was about. And then it was
what's the name of the book?
The book is Un-American Education, the Overschooling and Undereducating of America.
Okay. And
so that was just about how we got our school system in the mouths of the people that started it, which parents are usually gobsmacked, like, because they can't believe the sort of insidious intentions.
Sure.
And then the results, like, okay, well, using their own metrics, how are they doing? And sort of letting parents see that and go, okay, so this is why, whether you can get your kids out of that or not, you have to be intentional. And so then the second book was The Intentional Parent, and that was really about, okay, let's deal with the mindset so that irrespective of your choice at the end of the day, it's going to be the right one because you're always going to be looking out for your kids. So just be intentional. That's the only caveat. Just be intentional. So that book was kind of about helping parents, you know, process through that and then apply all these ideas and principles. And then we also realized, well, but you can have all of these techniques and strategies and mindset shifts, but if you're not healed emotionally, then at some point and at some level, you're not going to really be able to show up for your kids the way they need. And ultimately, at the end of the day, you know, as a parent, you want that. You want to give your kids a childhood, like I said earlier, that they really draw strength and encouragement and inspiration from, you know, not a childhood they have to recover from.
And so that led to...
Yeah, that led to us basically with like the self-parenting and grief recovery and sort of a lot of the one-on-one and group work that we do with people to try to help them really, because we believe in parents. You know, our society has Homer Simpsonized, you know, things. Like if you think about it, even in our media.
What do you mean by that? I'm sorry.
Well, like in our media, think about how many shows or movies there are where the dad, if he's not an abusive alcoholic who abandoned the family,
tons.
is a bumbling doofus whose only value is a paycheck. Mom is a professional who is gifted with the superpower of multitasking and is doing all this. And then you have your two snarky sages, otherwise known as children, who are outsmarting mom and dad at every turn. And it's funny on a level, but at some point you mock something long enough and you start to lose respect for it.
That makes sense.
And if you're a young man growing up, you're like, oh, so I'm a paycheck. Gosh, I can't wait to get married and do that and have kids and do that. And so it's funny because people are starting to wait longer and longer to get married, and they're waiting longer and longer to have kids. And I can't help but feel that a lot of that has to do with the way parents are treated in our society. You know, we actually treat people that play parents on TV and in film way better than we treat actual parents. They get a red carpet televised award show. What do moms and dads get? Usually they get grief from the school system. They get told that they're not measuring up somehow, that they're incompetent, and yet they soldier on, and they love their kids, and they do the very best they can. They're heroes for that. So I just think that, giving them everything that they can get to really be that mom or dad that they were meant to be I love that.
Is that so as we wrap up, Preparing Kids for Life, is it a program that you go through with parents?
Yeah.
Okay.
So it's part of kind of like a one-on-one, or it can also be part of a group. And so we have various times and slots where those are open and available to parents.
Is there a curriculum that you go through where it's like, hey, you learn these 12 things in 12 weeks, or is it?
There is, and it's an online. I mean, so it's kind of like set up where if people wanted to do it on their own, they can do that. If they would rather have a little bit more hands-on and do it in a group scenario with other people who are like-minded and who are in a similar situation, we have that. And if people want to just do one-on-one work, then we have that as well.
And they find that how? Is it a certain website?
Well, that we can kind of go. We have a website that people find us on. We have social media that they find us on. It's kind of
we'll put all that in like the description, but like, is it preparingkidsforlife.com or?
Yeah, it's pk4l.com.
pk4l.com. Okay.
Yeah.
So that's the Preparing Kids for Life. Mm-hmm. The self-parenting, is that also?
Yeah, that's all kind of part and parcel of that. So it's kind of like mindset coaching, and then also doing the emotional work. You know, we kind of look at it like it's a map, and you know, we're guides, and we're just going to help kind of equip you for the journey so that you can go on your own and enjoy the map, you know?
Okay. And the grief recovery, that's also part of
That's all part of it, yeah.
God, it's all part of it. Okay.
Yeah.
I'm excited to go read your books because there was a lot that we talked about today that's just naturally for me, I'm curious about those things, especially just starting to be a dad. We have a 2-year-old and a 2-month-old little baby elephant. This kid's eating so much. He's going to eventually be bigger than his big brother. We'll see what happens. But I definitely want to be as aware as I can of all, you know, things I got to fix. Being an entrepreneur for the last 19 years, you do a lot of, you know, personal development books.
Absolutely.
Coaching. You deal with a lot of different personality types, understanding them. We deal with a lot of people that have most of the issues that I see in entrepreneurship are also, you know, traumas that people have had over their life. And, you know, they keep showing up. Hey, why does that person not feel comfortable making that phone call, running that appointment? Where's that insecurity? Where'd that come into your life?
Yeah.
You know, we did a video the other day. Where did fear come into your life? And like, being able to to go back to that first moment.
Yeah.
So we teach that as much as we can inside of the business world.
Yeah.
But there's so much of that personal development that's so healthy for people just to take the weight off.
Yeah.
You know, you don't even know you're carrying it sometimes.
For sure.
So,
and we all experience life at 100%. So everybody's life is their normal, you know? So,
yeah. Well, thank you for being on. I appreciate it.
I'm so grateful.
I learned a ton.
I'm so grateful to be here, and thank you for having me.
And we'll share the books. We'll share the links wherever we post the video.
Okay.
So
great.
Guys, I hope you got value from that. There were some real serious topics. There were probably some sensitive topics. I know if you're a parent watching this and you're like, you know, what do I do? Like, how do I do better? I think checking out the site, I think reading some of those books, educating yourself. We'll put the social media links, so if you guys want to connect and reach out. I think it's definitely a conversation. If your kids are the most important thing in your life, making sure that you're the best version of yourself is our responsibility. And I tell that to people all the time. I don't want my kids to have to do the work that I didn't do on myself, you know? So I totally understand what you do, and it's great to have a resource, because up until now, you know, unless it's a therapist,
right,
I'm not even aware, you know, and again, maybe because I'm a new parent, but I'm not even aware that, you know, there's things out there to help parents.
Yeah.
You know? So it's great that what you guys are doing. God bless you guys on the work. So
thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Hope you enjoyed the video, guys. We'll see you on the next one. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.
All right. See y'all.